Thank you so much, Kerry. Well, it is a delight to be here, and it's my absolute pleasure to welcome the special guest. Nice being called a special guest.
Oh, thank you very much.
Yeah,
I'm very special. Hello, everyone.
So I don't think Tom needs much of an introduction. You are a comedian, a TV and radio presenter. You're now an author.
Sex symbol.
Oh, sex symbol.
Mm-hmm.
Fabulous. That didn't come up in
Philanthropist.
my research.
Oh, that's weird.
No, it is weird. I'll go back and Google.
Thank you very much.
Later. Okay,
yeah, do the research, goddammit, please.
I'm so sorry. But you have written a book, so now author is one of your descriptors. How exciting.
Yes.
Most importantly, you are a former Warrnambool boy.
Yes.
Yes.
Warrnambool to the core. Hometown forever. 3280, baby. Brah, brah, brah. Sorry, I shouldn't make that noise in a library.
Did you
yes.
prepare specific Warrnambool jokes for tonight?
Nothing specific, no. There's little bits in the book. The book isn't quite a memoir, but there are definitely some Warrnambool shout-outs in there. Yeah.
Well, I think we might start the night then with you sharing some of the Warrnambool bits in your book.
Oh, sure.
It's a very authorly thing to do, to do a reading. You must be a real author.
You say that with a level of surprise in your voice.
No, I'm not surprised at all.
Thank you, Ailish. And thank you very much to all our panellists who we're going to meet in a moment. Thank you, everyone, for coming. Thank you for the Collins Booksellers and Library. It's amazing to be here. And this is the biggest event that we've done around the book. So it means a lot to come home to the hometown and have such an amazing turnout. Thank you very much. I would like to read just a small bit from the prologue of the book, which I think does have a little bit of a Warrnambool shout-out and does sort of set up the conversation we might be having tonight. There is a small language warning. This is the only instance of swearing in the book. So I'm sorry to say the word fuck in a library. I already said it, there we go. In 2021, the ABC's Australia Talk survey, the biggest and most rigorous opinion poll ever conducted in this country, found that 65% of Australians think it's harder for young people to get by now than it used to be, and 59% think that young Australians will be overall worse off than their parents. The real question now is why? Why has that intergenerational bargain been broken? How the fuck did we get here? How did the world get so deranged? And what, if anything, can we possibly do about it? These questions have been rattling around my head for some time. They've changed me. I've always identified as a progressive. I was born to Labor Green voting parents who are unionists and members of Amnesty International. Shout out Judy and Neil. Oh, someone tried to start applause. Brutal, tough crowd. And as a kid, I tried to heal the world by doing the 40-hour famine, running for student council, and joining a local, awkwardly named anti-homophobia youth group, Youth United Making Changes Against Homophobic Attitudes, aka Yumcha. I was being very brave doing all this revolutionary organising because it was happening in Liberal heartland. My seaside hometown of Warrnambool sits in Goodnitch-Mara, Darraboran country in southwestern Victoria, within the federal electorate of Wannon, a seat that's been held by the Liberal Party since a young Malcolm Fraser won it from Labor in 1955. Fraser handed the seat over to David Hawker in 1983, who would go on to sit in it for 27 years, become the Speaker of the House of Representatives, and occasionally send me congratulatory letters when I did well in public speaking competitions. He retired in 2010 and handed it to Dan Tehan, who will lose in 2025 to Alex Dyson. That's my prediction. Lock it in. Conservative though it may be, Warrnambool makes for a very pretty, friendly and safe corner of the world, replete with nice people, beaches, roundabouts, horses, Norfolk pines and folk music. More recently, there's also been quite a bit of crystal meth. And a slide that breaks people's legs. Oh, okay, that's edgy. All right. Throughout my early 20s, I was a classic bleeding heart SJW, signing petitions and going to refugee rights rallies and tweeting snarky comments about religious homophobes and watching The West Wing. I knew that politics generally sucked, but hey, at least Kevin Rudd and Obama were the good guys, and they do good things. I also knew for sure that the Greens were awesome, all Conservatives were racists, and politics would be much better if everyone was just nicer to each other. Simple. But then 2016 broke my brain. Pauline Hanson returned to the Senate on a wave of Islamophobia. Broken Britain voted to leave the European Union. I spent 6 weeks filming First Contact, an immersive SBS documentary series about white-black race relations in Australia, alongside One Nation co-founder David Oldfield. Now, my original draft had alongside One Nation co-field and violent racist David The The whole baby boomer versus millennial, the only reason you can't afford a house is because of smashed avocado discourse had begun in earnest. And in November, Donald Trump was elected to be the 45th President of the United States. I can still remember travelling home to Warrnambool on a V-Line train that afternoon, watching the results come through on my phone, trying to comprehend how the impossible had come to pass. The big wet idiot from The Apprentice was going to have access to nukes. And quietly shitting myself about where all this was headed, I began to question everything.
There is a little bit more swearing in the book.
There's one or two other
It's
instances.
a tiny bit.
Yeah.
But it is a fantastic read, and we're here tonight to discuss more of the issues raised in your book. And to do that, we've assembled a very brave, intergenerational panel of Warrnamboolians. That's like a tongue twister. And here they are. So, first, in the baby boomers' corner, I don't want to make it too oppositional straight away, but there we are, I have. So, best of luck, everyone. So, baby boomer Bob Hanby is a former international aid worker, an officer of the Order of Australia, and an author. Bob holidays with his wife of 50 years in their caravan, plays golf, listens to proper music. That is what's written on my card, Bob. That's a way to start. Now, proper music from the 70s, I don't know, contentious, and enjoys eating a good old-fashioned dinner of meat and 3 veg. Please put your hands together for Bob Hanby. Next up, we have Generation X, and Dr. Jodie Fleming is representing Generation X tonight. Jodie's a clinical and health psychologist, wellness retreat leader, and author. Gosh, when I get to Shana, I'm happy to note that we're bookended by non-authors at this point. But there we go. We've got all of the authors sandwiched in the middle. Oh, have you written a book?
Not yet.
Oh, just me then. So Jodie used to ride her bike each night all over the Warrnambool until the streetlights came on, wearing her Nikes just like the kid in the Goonies, and had a crush on Michael J. Fox. Welcome, Jodie. Now, Tom is obviously our millennial representative. I do confess that I am also a millennial, but I am on this side, and I'm so impartial. You can tell that already. So, rounding out our panel, we have from Gen Z, they also call them the Zoomers, Shana Rogers. She's a journalist and a weather presenter with a passion for coffee, like every other 20-something-year-old wearing a tote bag. Once she's paid her rent, she spends her minimal remaining income on living her best life and believes her metal straw will save the world one expensive beverage at a time. Give it up for Shana. So Tom...
Now we fight to the death.
I did
With our
set it
metal
up a bit
straws.
like that, didn't I? No.
It's
And
on.
I promised them before that it wouldn't be oppositional, but there you go. My competitive edge just always comes out. So Tom, your book is really in 6 sections, 6 issues. We don't have time to go through all 6 tonight, so we've picked the top 3. Well, I've picked the top 3
Sure.
because I'm in charge. So this one's been in the news a lot, and my question to you is, what did you have for breakfast this morning?
I do not have smashed avocado for breakfast.
Well, how on earth are you owning a house?
I didn't. I had a more millennial breakfast, which is
Okay.
a breakfast served to me by my parents as I slept in my childhood bedroom at the age of 33. That's the most millennial shit you can do, right there.
Those some big truths there, Tom.
Yes, so I
Yeah.
think I win.
So, of course, we're talking about housing. Housing is one of the 6 issues that Tom goes through, and it's fascinating. So you've recently bought a house. You're fulfilling the Australian dream. What does
Yes.
it feel like?
Well, a few qualifiers here. I know that this is like a betrayal of everything millennial, and in 2019 I was doing a stand-up show called Enough, and I was talking about a lot of this stuff too. That was the show where I had this big baby boomer routine, which some folks might have seen. I did it for the gala. But at the end of that show, I revealed the fact that I had in fact bought an apartment, and someone yelled out, "Death to Tom Ballard," which is the most intense heckle I've ever received, I think. Definitely up there.
You can try tonight, though. Any hecklers?
I think I could take this crowd, I'll be
You
honest.
reckon?
But,
Okay. Stand down.
The house, the property that I bought is an apartment that I bought with my brother. It's a 3-bedroom apartment in Footscray, and we did it with extraordinary help from my beautiful boomer parents, who I love very much, and I hope they have a long and healthy life. And I am something of the exception that proves the rule, right? Like, I can't be the example for how to buy a house for young people today. I somehow managed some bullshit career out of showbiz, which is occasionally you get heaps of money, sometimes you get no money at all, but it's all ridiculous. I succeeded through showbiz somehow, had substantial financial help from my parents, and had to buy it with my brother. Bought an apartment with my brother, and it's still crazy expensive, and I'll be paying it off for the next 30 years. It's near a river, so, it'll probably be underwater by the time the mortgage is fulfilled. So it's bad because, chapter 2 of the book is sort of looking at this housing crisis thing, which is truly insane. I mean, I knew it was bad going into it, but researching and actually thinking about how bad it is extraordinary. The Australian housing market worth about $10 trillion all up, and home ownership, as we all know, is just sort of trending down across the board. For young people particularly, it's seriously crashing. At about 70% of boomers, by the time they reached the age of 30, had become homeowners. For millennials, less than half of people had been able to do that by the time they reached their early 30s. For the poorest chunk of people, aged 25 to 34, home ownership has dropped about 40% since the 80s. We know about the rental crisis, the housing crisis. A select number of people have shitloads of houses, and my generation has been almost entirely locked out of the whole thing. And that's not an accident. That's because of policy choices over a number of decades that have prioritised, basically commodified and financialised housing, which is a basic human need. We all need housing to live a decent life, and we've turned this into a wealth-generating asset as opposed to what I would consider it to be a human right. Yeah. But I'm fine.
I'm so pleased to hear that, Tom. That's great. Now, we do have a panel of people that have different experiences in housing. I'd like to start with you, Bob. What was it like for you when you first bought a house, and how did you find the 17% interest rates that we all hear about as millennials?
My guess is it was probably a little easier than it is these days, but having said that, it was still a challenge. We bought a house, our first house in Melbourne, in I think about 1975. We worked, both of us, Judy and I, saved very hard to get the necessary deposit, which the banks demand at that time, which is 25% of the cost of the house. I can't actually recall what the interest rates were when we first bought it, but they did go up to 17% at one stage. But when I say we saved, we didn't go on holidays to Bali or to Noosa. We didn't go out for coffees 4 times a week. We didn't go out to restaurants. We didn't go to shows at the MCG or wherever. So we saved with the intention of getting our first home. The other thing that I think was interesting then, which is very interesting, different now, is the banks were very constrained on how much they would lend you. And we were able to borrow, at that time, $30,000 to buy our house. We bought a house that we could afford. We didn't buy a house in Brighton or Toorak, which we would like to have done. We bought it out at Waverley. But the banks would only lend you an amount that you could absolutely afford to repay based on the salary that you were getting at the time, and it didn't include the salary that your wife was getting, knowing darn well in those days you might end up having children. And your children, children didn't go into child mining. In that case, my wife stayed home to look after the children. So we were constrained by the banks, which was a good thing. And I think built into that formula was the fact that as interest rates went up, we could still afford to make our repayments.
It's really interesting the different factors. You say that you saved a lot, and the banks were also quite prudent. Shana, how are you feeling about buying a house?
I currently live with 2 other people in Warrnambool, and I'm lucky as a 21-year-old, I know, to be in the position to even have a house over my head pretty much. And I live with my 2 best friends, which is awesome, and you can only imagine what it's like being 21 and living with your best friends. And we had a house inspection, a week ago, and I have never been so scared in my life, really. And like, it's the whole idea of, oh, we've got to chuck out all of the wine bottles, and then it's, are we going to have a house at the end of this? Everyone knows what the rent market's like at the moment. And the fact, as I said before, the fact that we do have a house over our head, and, you know, 1/3 of my wage goes to living and sleeping in a bed, which I'm so lucky to have, but it's scary. And, you know, to know that if there's a hole in the wall, or, you know, the light switches aren't wiped, then that could be wiped and taken right from me. As far as buying a house, I eat smashed avocado. I'm sorry.
Never, Shana.
And I am also a barista, so I don't pay for my coffee. So I'm really lucky on that part. But yeah, I'm saving a fortune. It's strategic, don't worry. But yeah, it's terrifying to know that the picket fence might not be a thing for me, where, you know, my parents painted their picket fence. So, you know, yeah.
You could rent a fence. That'd be nice.
Yeah, I don't know. That should be a business? Rent a fence for a millennial. Like,
Doesn't have quite the same ring to it as no. Thanks, Shana.
May I very quickly be annoying research guy, because this was filling my head for such a long time. But I think it's an important point to make that on the data that we have available, the idea that young people today are particularly profligate or are spending on lots of unnecessary luxuries when it comes to food and stuff simply doesn't bear out by the facts. So the ABS looks at this kind of stuff, and the proportion of 25 to 34-year-olds who are spending money on in the 1980s on housing was about 14%, and food and stuff was about 14% of their disposable income as well. Today, it's much more likely for the housing cost to go up to something like 18%, and food costs have actually dropped to about 10% of their disposable income. So if you were to look at the raw data the ABS provides, then that would throw a fair bit of doubt on this idea that it is expensive brunches and stuff that are affecting the young people's ability to buy a house. And when you look at just how much houses have increased in price, you'll see all this stuff fades away. I mean, in the 70s and 80s, the median house was about 3 to 4 times your yearly income. Now it's much closer to 9 or 10 times. So just the basic sticker price, getting together the deposit for the median house price in this country will probably take you about a decade of saving, something like that. So the numbers are really pretty mind-blowing. Also, I can appreciate that high interest rates make it really hard to pay off a mortgage, but low interest rates, which was what we've experienced particularly over the past couple of decades, it's obviously changing now, that's real bad for house prices. Like lower interest rates attracts way more people into the market and property investors to say, hey, this is a great chance for us to make a sweet return on buying up houses. This thing that human people need in order to live, we can make a sweet buck out of this. So the age of low interest rates has actually also been a massive factor in pushing up house prices in this country.
Thank you, Tom. And feel free to pepper us with lots of data.
I just did so much reading. I need a gold star for my work.
I think everyone's got a gold star for you later on.
Thanks.
Now, Jodie, you own a home. Do you despair?
Ailish, I think the word own is a little much of an exaggeration.
A bit of a stretch of a truth.
I have to say, Tom, if you haven't read Tom's book, you really must get it. I learned an awful lot reading that book. You're very, very smart, too smart for me. Each generation is supposed to be smarter than the one before. Totally nailed it. Except for you, Bob. Bob, you are the smartest, most interesting man I've ever met. One thing that I learned from Tom's book is that although I'm 8 years older than the first millennial, I've spent a lot of time living my life as if I am a millennial, so I kind of feel like I might be the first millennial. But what I wished I had was Tom's book way back when I was 21 and a little bit older, because I have owned, and again, own, loose use of the word, a few houses in my time. What I wish I knew then was that I should be acting like a baby boomer and never sell property, because I would be worth zillions right now. But I acted like a millennial and I sold those houses and I took the money and I went and lived overseas and travelled and ate avocado. So the truth is, yes, I do have a home now. I bought it 13 years ago, just before I turned 40. I was diagnosed with breast cancer, and for some strange reason that made me want to lay down roots and stay around. So again, I'm to empathise with Shana's position and the Zoomers' position. I've got two nephews who are 16 and 18, and I've had several conversations with my sister and brother-in-law about that it's very unlikely that they're going to be able to enter the housing market without our support. And luckily for them, I don't have kids, so they get everything. Yeah, so I can empathise too, and this is, I might get shot down for this. I'm at a very late stage of life considering purchasing my first investment property like a boomer.
Get her, Tom, get her.
But so that I can give Shana a house to live in. And I'm just finding it astronomical. Like, you might have to pay $1 million for a postage stamp size piece of land and a tiny little house. So no, I just don't even know what I would do if that was the situation. Luckily for the old people's homes, by the time I need them, and they will have my house to take off me and look after me with that money.
What a positive spin on a pretty grim. Yeah. Thank you, Jodie. So next up is work. Yeah. What do you think's changed since Bob was fronting up for his first job, Tom?
Oh, when was that, Bob? What was your first job? Bob, into the mic.
1968.
Oh, gosh.
Long time ago.
What was that?
I worked as a public servant in
nice.
Horsham. Yep.
In Horsham?
Up in Horsham. I was
nice.
heard about the boy from Horsham.
Yeah, right.
I'm one of them.
We're just catching up now.
Yeah, thanks. That's great. I'm doing a great job of moderating there. Thank you, Tom.
Well, obviously, a lot has changed of the world of work since 1968. That's certainly true. Obviously, a whole bunch of good things that we could all like. Female participation in the workforce and economic independence. That's fantastic. That's great. To a degree, technology has obviously made our lives a lot easier in a lot of different ways. That's obviously had a huge impact on the workforce. But also, the world of work that millennials have inherited is one that is way more casualised than it was in the 1950s and 60s, in the post-war era. Casual work exploded in the 1980s. Underemployment has exploded. We have this, the third highest rate of insecure work in the OECD. That's work that doesn't provide people with a level of security and economic control over their own lives. So that's the gig economy, casualisation, part-time, labour hire. Excuse me. That's a major factor, of course. Unemployment is a completely different situation. In the post-war boom era, you had a yearly average of unemployment of about 2%, okay? 2% unemployment, 4.5% economic growth year on year. That was the average. That's why it really was this extraordinary time of economic booming that was going on. Today, we've completely transformed our relationship to unemployment to the point where 5% unemployment is considered ideal. I mean, the Reserve Bank is kind of trying to increase unemployment at the moment. It's not saying that, but that's actually what they want to have happen to try and tamper on inflation. So that's a kind of brutal approach we now take to joblessness. In previous eras, the idea of unemployment or lack of work was seen as a policy failure, right? It was the government's job to find people work and put themselves into work. The Chifley government introduced the Commonwealth Employment Service, which was a publicly owned service that was about putting people in jobs. That's all been privatised and got rid of since. But also, the real big story that I wanted to write about a fair bit was just the dwindling of worker power. Okay, in the 50s and 60s, 50% of the Australian workforce would have been unionised. Today, it's down to 14%. Even lower in the private sector, and for young people it's almost non-existent. I think Australians under 25, estimated between 5 and 9% of workers are in a union. We don't really know what they are, we don't know what they do, we haven't seen them make a massive change in our life, and that means that work inevitably sucks way more than ever, and we are exploited as employees and workers way more because we don't have power. And it's not even, what was depressing putting the book together, it's not even just like millennial workers don't have the idea of organising within their workplace to improve their lot, to ensure that your wages keep up with inflation, to get rid of a shitty boss who's like harassing you, to have reasonable occupational health and standards. It's also going beyond that and thinking about things like, what if we wanted a 4-day work week? What if we wanted to democratise our workplaces? We don't have the power or any idea about how to do that. And if anybody does try to do anything like that, they're of course immediately told that they should be grateful for having a job and they don't know what the hell they're doing. I think they're the main ones. Apart from that, it's great.
Fabulous. Work sucks, I know. Is that?
Work sucks, I know. That was a
Yeah.
running theme throughout. Now, I'm a comedian, so I hate all work, and I'm very anti-work in any way. I've managed to figure out something where I work about an hour a day max, and that really is the ideal, and would highly recommend it to everybody.
That's Tom's top tip for the
That's my
night.
top tip.
Fabulous. Now,
Quit slowly, yes.
Bob, in your life, were you in a union?
Yes, I was in a union. I worked for local government for a fair period of my life, and during that time I belonged to the union. I got no idea what it was called, but it was a union. And I was never a very strong unionist, I might add, but I felt that I was constrained in my capacity to negotiate my own personal conditions at work by the union, because they had an award and they kept saying, well, this is the award, this is what you get paid according to. But I was in a profession that was in demand. I was considered to be good at my job, and every time I'd go to the boss and say, well, you know, I'm going to leave if you don't give me a pay rise, he'd say, well, there's the award, that's what you have to stick to. So I ultimately left the union over a period of, after many years, and I started negotiating my own way through my employment, and became far financially better off by getting out of the union. That might be a fairly unique situation, but that was my case.
Thanks, Bob, for sharing. So there's a little counter story, Tom.
Yes, well, again, I could annoyingly pull out some facts to sort of say that is a very atypical experience. I think workers, even though as weak as unions are today, I think the average unionised worker makes about 32% more than non-union labour in terms of wage rates. And I'm sure that you like the weekend, Bob. You're a fan of the weekend?
No, I love them.
Well, we would not have the weekend, of course, without trade unions organising and campaigning to try and reduce the working week.
But Tom, I say now that one of the disadvantages of being retired, we don't get any public holidays.
Yeah, my heart's breaking for you, Bobby.
I used
be a nightmare.
I used to look forward to Easter and Anzac Day and all this. We get none of them. Every day's the same.
The struggle is real, mate.
No, it's been tough.
That is really tough for you, Bob. Thank you. But thanks for sharing about your union experience, and it's great to have anecdotal evidence and data.
Yeah,
Thank
look,
you, Tom.
I mean, you know, there are lots of reasons why unions are not great as an institution. The ACTU is much more conservative than I would like the union movement to be. The SDA, for example, which is the massive union that represents retail workers, really sucks and represents retail workers, used unions' members' fees to try and campaign against marriage equality, against reproductive rights, and were found, thanks to, you know, there's a pretty awesome investigative journalism in the work of the Retail and Fast Food Workers Union, to have been signing up deals with Coles and Woolies that screwed over their own workers. So this is like a company yellow union that was actually undermining their workers and have enormous sway in the Labor Party because of the way the Labor Party is established. So, you know, a big reason why Labor Party didn't go on board with marriage equality earlier is because of the influence of the SDA. So, plenty of reasons why various unions at various instances are no good. But broadly speaking, they're a hell of a lot better than the alternative in my view. Yeah.
And in reading Tom's book, you present a really compelling argument. The other thing that came out for me was this idea of loyalty, and that I think in Bob's generation and maybe Jodie's generation, you're taught to be a loyal employee. And is that how you approached work, Jodie, in your...
I'm not sure if this is a Gen X thing or a growing up in my dad's house thing. But yes, definitely. I think, you know, my dad was obviously a boomer who worked in the same job for 35 years, and I was adamant that would never be me. But I also think I've always been aware that my generation and the younger generations are more likely to have multiple career changes in their lifetime, and that's certainly come to pass. I think what was instilled in me, though, was a real sense of gratitude for having employment, and a real sense of not what your employer could do for you, but what you could do for your employer. No, honestly, my dad freaks out still. Like, if I have annual leave, which is an entitlement, might I add, and I work in a school, so we get this entitlement fairly regularly, he's like, "Are you having leave again? You're going to lose your job." Yep.
They
that
improved it, Dad.
pretty well sums it up. So,
Yeah, that makes me so sad. My mum's a teacher. My dad worked in teaching. I've always hated this resentment that some people have, or this joke that teachers have so many holidays, they have it so easy. I just like, first of all, holidays are great, and just because you don't have enough holidays, don't get angry at the teachers. Teachers work extremely goddamn hard, and it's a very valuable profession. But yeah, there is this brain virus this brainwashing, I think, that a lot of young people are instilled with. To yes, you're lucky to have a job. You're not working to make you're working to make things better. You're a worker. Your labour actually creates wealth, creates a better society. You should get your fair share of that. And that's not what's happened. I mean, another brief thing, and sorry, Shana, to be encroaching on your time, but the important point to note is that when unions were so strong, the share of national income going to labour peaked at about 63% in the mid-1970s. All right, that's of all the national income every year, 63% is going to labour, to workers, to ordinary people. Well, since the big turns, the economic turns of the 70s and 80s, that's just a downward trend, and in 2020, for the first time, dropped below 50%. So that means the rest is going to capital, right, the people at the top. So that's clearly what happens when you have a strong labour movement, when you have people striking and taking action to demand what's theirs, to get their fair share, which is still just 63%. Once you attack the union movement, hack away at it, as successive governments have done, well, yeah, you get the results.
It's really telling, isn't it? Has anyone been on strike on the panel? No.
I interviewed a guy once that was on strike. And I knew this dude from making coffees for 2 years, and he said, "Oh, you've got to come out. We're doing a strike at ... business." And I was like, "Okay." And I didn't go. And then I served him on the Saturday, and he's like, "You didn't come to the strike." And I was like, "I know. I'm really sorry. I was actually working." And he said, "Well, no one else came to the strike either. It was just me."
Just him. That's called a day off, I think.
Michael is a legend. He's a really, really lovely dude. But this was last year, and he's still making movements. He's been travelling to Melbourne, talking with union, talking with people high up, he says, having meetings.
Very important people, I think.
And we're talking about this while I'm making his flat white in a caravan, so, it's really pressing stuff. But when I'm got my journalist hat on, or even just a young person trying to learn about stuff, I'm like, tell me how you've got to this point, or how did you even find out that wasn't fair? You're working, for me, I just assume or expect that, I don't know, is that really entitled? I don't know, that everyone's just going to be fair and, I'm not going to get ripped off and stuff like that. I don't know, maybe I've just been really lucky. But on the segue of my employment, I have had 13 jobs and I'm 21, but I would like to completely admit that I've only been fired from one. So
that's a fine strike rate, Shana. That's fine. You're amongst friends.
Not because I hated working or anything like that. I love working, don't get me wrong. Day and night I have, mostly in hospitality, but mostly because once I get to a point where I'm not learning from the people around me, I'm like, I can move on. I've got the freedom. I've always been taught that you are replaceable. There is someone out there that if you cannot fill that role, someone will do it for you. And so that's kind of the absolute opposite to Bob's way of thinking of employment, or even Jodie's, of being you are dedicated to this. And I fully believe in loyalty, don't get me wrong. I'm loyal to my employees, and but it's the fact that anyone now, you skill up and you're replaced, catch her. And education is really out there. People are, you can travel to Melbourne, skill up, you've got a degree under your belt, and it's accessible for people now. Education, you can learn how to design apps and stuff. This 18-year-old dude that I work with is software, he's designing software. I'm like, what? Can you help me with my Outlook? I don't reply to emails yet. But do you know what I'm saying?
I can't work this email. I keep getting fired.
Yeah.
Help me, please.
Help me, please. And he knows he's way smarter than I am. It's just okay, you're literally 3 years younger than me, chill. But is this what it feels like when my nan's asking me how to use an iPad? Probably. I don't know. But yeah, But yeah, as far as you can skill up, you can learn, you're replaceable, but it's totally up to the person and where they want to go and where they want to take a career. Because people my age, casual jobs, doing something that's just kind of paying the bills, and then they bugger off to overseas, or they want to go live their best life buying festival tickets and come back and do their 9 to 5, and they've got their eyes hanging out of their heads like, oh, that was a big weekend. But it's different.
If I can give two...
Go for it, Bob. Go for it.
Very, very quick, two, which makes me think how bizarre it was, but I went overseas in 1970. I had my 21st birthday in Italy, and I had one mate who was...
Bloody kids travelling the world. Why weren't you saving for a house, Bob?
I worked... I had a mate who was considering travelling with me, and he went home and said to his parents, I'm thinking of going overseas with Bob Hamby, and his parents says, no way, you're doing that. You've got a good job with a CRB and you've got to stay here. Oh. So he stayed there for the rest of his life. And the good side of that is that because he didn't come, Judy came with me, and when we got home, she was so much in debt she ended up having to marry me, because she couldn't afford to pay the money back. But
that sounds so romantic.
Well, that's so romantic.
It was a good investment. On my part, but that shows you how...
Thanks for the qualifier there, Bob.
But it shows you how valuable $300 was in 1970 or 71. But I had another friend in the public service, Ted Jamieson, who I worked with in 71, 72 in Melbourne. He hated his job, and 50 years later, he was still working the same job and still hating it.
That's what Loda will get you, hey? Thanks, Bob.
Did he get like a gold watch after like 50 years? Or
I don't know. I think they end up kicking him out, I think.
A prize?
I think I think in summary, choose happiness. I don't know.
Happiness is good. I mean, look, again, I'm extremely lucky to do whatever the hell it is I do, and to do something that you love doing. And there are lots of people, obviously love their job and are very lucky to do that, and that should be celebrated and treasured. But I mentioned a statistic in the book. I think the global survey, Gallup, the polling company, does a global survey of workers. 79% of workers aren't engaged at work. So that's 79% of people who kind of hate their jobs. I assume the other 21% had to fill out the survey in front of their boss. It's even if you love your job, you probably don't love. You probably like to work less, or you would like to have more control over what happens at your workplace. Or imagine if you had to elect your boss. Imagine if your boss had to earn your vote in order to become the boss. Imagine if you shared the profits of your business. Wouldn't that be a better, happier, healthier, democratic process? And this week, I don't know if people saw, but this massive trial of the 4-day work week in the UK, hugely successful, employees way more happier, more productive, revenue stays the same. This is an idea that, of course, is constantly derided as ridiculous and utopian and socialist or whatever. But of course, I think within the next decade, it's going to become common sense. So we're really going to transform the way we think about the working week and realise that, it's not a law from God that we have to work 5 days a week. That we can actually choose to change that. Yeah.
Unfortunately for Bob, though, he won't experience that.
Yeah, you won't get that at all.
I'm sorry, Bob, it's not for you.
Terrible, isn't it? Never mind.
Never mind. Bob will console him in caravan trips and golf, I think. So right. I think you'll be right, Bob.
We'll be right.
Bob, please don't be funnier than me for the rest of the night. It's you humiliating me here, mate.
I know. I'll try, Tom.
And you did it again.
I think he stacked the audience.
Oh, I see.
It has to be. No. So next up is the climate crisis, Tom.
Oh, yep. Oh. Yep, let's end on a laugh.
Yeah, it's sort of peaking and then, yes. Now, it's fairly sobering reading, the chapter on the climate crisis. Mm-hmm. One thing you do, though, at the start is you sort of break some bad news with some nice facts.
Yes.
And you also write them in really little text. The bad news, and then the funny facts sort of in big, bold font.
Yeah. So, yes, and I'd love to share them with folks if you can. Yes, this just felt like an easy way to sort of soften the blow, a little bit of sugar to help the medicine go down. People can see on the page the funny facts are in large text, and the depressing ones are in small text. So let's see if this sort of helps Helps take the sting out a little bit. According to the World Wildlife Fund, humanity has wiped out 60% of mammals, birds, fish and reptiles since 1970. Squirrels have been known to take in orphan pups if the babies are closely related to the adoptive mother.
Aww.
The world's oceans are now heating at the same rate as if 5 Hiroshima atomic bombs were being dropped into the water every second. When playing with female puppies, male puppies will often let the females win. Greenland's ice sheets hold enough water to raise world sea levels by 7 metres. The island is currently losing 283 gigatons of ice every year. A pig's orgasm can last for 30 minutes. The World Health Organization estimates that between 2030 and 2050, there will be around 250,000 excess deaths per year due to climate change, caused by heat stress, diarrhea, malaria, and childhood malnutrition. A group of ferrets is called a business. So there you go. Those are the kind of, it's not all bad,
Oh, yeah, it's not all bad at all.
Sure.
No, that's fine.
I mean, those facts are about the natural world, which is the thing that we are destroying with capitalism and fossil fuels. But, it's still they're cute facts to know for now.
Yeah, they're such cute facts. I feel really reassured. Thanks, Tom. No, it's really sobering reading, and I've done a fair bit of work in the climate change space, and even for me, it was really sobering. So I'd actually like to go to Jodie and to understand from your perspective. You work as a school psychologist, and you've seen some kids expressing some climate anxiety. How does that go for you?
First of all, I think I really think that the Gen Z generation is my favourite. I love working. No, honestly.
Thanks for nothing.
She looked at me.
Hey.
No, well.
I mean, we're all here, Jodie.
They're just smarter. They are, and mainly I love working with them so much because they just are so hopeful, believe it or not, or they at least create hope in me because of their willingness to be informed, to not just accept the status quo, to question, and to be proactive. Like when I was in high school, I think it might have been a little bit before we started hearing about the hole in the ozone layer, and all that really meant was you needed some more sunscreen, right? These guys know everything. They're teaching us so much. They're forming committees at school. We have student leaders who take on climate as their area of interest, and they run projects. We're familiar with recycling, but they take repurposing and reusing and recycling as well in our school to a whole other level. And I know you joked about the one metal straw at a time thing, but I just think if we've got a generation of people who are willing to actually question the leaders of the world who are not acknowledging the problems in this space, then we can be hopeful for the future. It's such a beautiful thing to be a part of and to learn from them, actually. But in terms of them expressing anxiety, like sadly, our kids are expressing anxiety about their futures in general. Will I be able to get a job? Will I be able to afford a house? Will I be able to have a family? Will there be a world that I can live in? Will there be clean air? You take 2 seconds to put yourself in their shoes, and I did in the shower before coming here because I'm like, okay, I need to be able to empathise. And it just makes you feel sick to your stomach. Like, I just can't imagine what it must be like. Sorry, Shana. Yeah, sorry.
Well, over to Shana. How are you feeling about the climate crisis?
Yeah, that's a tricky one. You guys are very packed with information, but I guess we've got to deal with this. Like Tom talks about in his book about, look what you guys have done. Now the young people have got to deal with it all, and that is kind of the reality of it. But that doesn't mean that while you boomers and yourself, Jodie, like you can't be putting things in action, so then instilling it into the young people that this is how we treat recycling, and teaching the young people to put things in action so it just comes second nature for us. I mean, as educated as we can get and educate the future, it's also still your responsibility to be passing on that information. And As far as the anxiety for me, like it's terrifying. Like it's absolutely terrifying. And living on the coast as well, it becomes way more prominent. Like you're walking down the beach, and picking up Q-tips. Like there's a full action plan about Q-tips for our coast. Nurdles, we've heard of that word 100 times in Warrnambool because there's one amazing human being that is screaming it to the top of her lungs, and it's only taken how long for us to start listening. That's scary, and she's got people on Sundays out of all days to be on our hands and knees picking up these tiny little microfiber bits of plastic. That's an issue that we think is normal, where generations that are older than us are, oh, that's interesting. But we're just like, oh, there's a nerdle, I'll pick that up because I know that that's what I should be doing. And then, we also get some, I guess, whiplash for not being proactive enough. Saying that we do all of these things, like using metal straws and recyclable drink bottles, but not putting action in. And I think it comes with the don't just share the link, do something about it. You can speak it, but can you act it? Shopping at Cotton On, these Country Road and these big brands, like we bang on about sustainability, but our generation are the biggest spenders in disposable stuff. Start visiting op shops. Sew your clothes together. Like this is the things that we learn from older people. My nan, every time that I...
Don't look at me.
No, not you. You're transparent in this one. Sorry, Bob. Hi. But like my nan worked at Fletcher Jones, and every time a button is popped, it's not let's chuck it out, let's fix it. That's the mentality that you teach the kids, that we can learn from you as much as we can tell you about facts and statistics and pick up nerdles. We can still teach our kids young stuff. You guys lived in your means. That's something that we can do as young people. We're still spending so much money on stuff that we don't need and not living in our means. And, we just love buying shit from the internet. Like, let's stop doing that and still living in our means and copying the practice of recycling a bit more than just using the recycle bin, if that makes sense.
Thanks, Shana. Bob, you've spent a lot of time overseas. Has your international work informed your approach to climate change?
Yes, it definitely has, but it definitely has. And in thinking about it, yesterday playing golf, when I'd been reading Tom's book, and when he quotes, I think, that if all the snow in Greenland melts, that the ocean will rise 7 metres. The baled hay that we've got on the 16th hole to stop the ocean encroaching on the 16th hole is not going to cut it. So I think we've got a fair bit to worry about.
Someone think of the golfers.
For goodness
Please.
sake. On what I've noticed, I've done a couple of projects overseas in relation to climate change. One was to look at the Red Cross's priorities for working in the Pacific Islands in particular, and there are a couple of islands which we investigated and came to the conclusion that because of the rise of the ocean, the climate change is resulting in the fact that those countries having to be relocated. So then the question was, were they going to come to Australia or New Zealand? And there was an argument about that. But Judy and I just recently came back from, we took our 10 grandchildren to Fiji, which actually cost the same as buying my first house, by the way. But we went to a little village called Narwini, and Narwini is one of the villages that's been earmarked already for relocation. So I have been exposed to it, but then on the other hand, I was thinking when I'm working in the civil war in Sri Lanka in 2006, and the women are screaming at me through the windscreen of the car, tell your boss, which was me, don't bring water anymore, bring poison. We'd rather be dead than living like this. They're actually not that worried about climate change. And when you're working in a refugee camp, there people have been there for generations. Climate change is the least of the things on their mind. So I am very conscious of climate change. I think in Australia, the thing that saddens me as much, and I'm conscious of it, I've got an environmental health background, so I've got some knowledge of it, But also, I think our politicians go out of the way to complicate it to the point that no one can understand them. And I think they probably do that on purpose. And I read, I watch news bulletins, and at the end of it, I think, what in the hell are they talking about? And I don't think it should be that complicated to get the message through to the normal people of this world as to what the impact of climate change and what are the remedies for it.
I think it's all buying metal straws. I think that's the key
That's what we need
remedy.
to do. That's what the safeguard mechanism is all about.
I think
Metal
so.
straws for everyone.
Yeah.
Yes.
Thanks, Tom. So that rounds out our discussion. We're going to throw it over to questions from the audience. And while we get those microphones ready, I have some questions that I have for you.
Oh,
I know.
goodness.
So, number one,
Yes.
Alex Dyson, your former radio co-host, ran for the scene of Wanted last year. Is this book your entree into the political scene, Tom?
Fuck no. Excuse my French, but absolutely not. What the hell do I know? I told Alex Dyson, I was like, don't run as an independent. Run for the Greens. You'll do way better. First year, outpolls the Greens in the seat of Wanted. And then, 2022 almost wins the goddamn thing and will win it in 2025. So I don't know what the hell I'm on about. I don't think this book would be a great way to launch my political career. The first line is, I began the decade on ketamine. So it probably won't win me a huge amount of cut-through votes, particularly more Conservative voters. But I am involved in the Greens. I joined the Greens in 2020. I'm involved in my local branch. I like the Greens. I care about the Greens. I would like the Greens to do well. But I have seen what being a politician is. It looks awful and boring and hard. And again, I'm a comedian. I get to sleep till 10, say what I want, and have a lovely time, travel the world doing that. So it might be quite selfish, but yeah, I think being an actual politician would be a nightmare. And I think there are far more qualified people who'd be better.
I think we'll leave it to Alex.
Yeah, he'll do it.
Yeah.
He's great.
Does anyone have
I
a
think
question?
he's read the book.
Sure.
He'll do everything that I lay out here, yeah.
Anyone have a question from the audience?
Oh, come on.
Oh, there we go.
Speaking of a 4-day work week, would you rather do Monday, Tuesday, have Wednesday off, Thursday, Friday, or would you rather have 3-day weekend? Thoughts?
Hey, fantastic question. Thank you very much. Round of applause for that question.
That's good. Yes.
I don't mind.
Yeah.
Doesn't worry me.
Don't worry, this guy.
Doesn't worry, Bob.
Retired over here, come on.
He's got a 7-day weekend over here. Again, I don't work on Monday to Friday either, so I feel
Doesn't worry
cheating.
Tom either.
Doesn't bother me, but I reckon long weekend would be the way to go, surely. But that's me. But I don't know.
I totally want 3 days in a row off.
Yes.
I would think, yes.
Thanks, Courtney, for the question. So I won't be seeing you around the traps. No, I think for me, isn't that everyone's dream to have just a 4-day weekend? I mean, I don't know, I've worked 7-day weeks before, and that's pretty hectic. So to have, 4 days.
It's a 3-day weekend. You've jumped straight to 4-day weekend, which is amazing.
I
And I
want
love
We
the
can
ambition.
campaign for that, Shana. We can campaign for that. That's the next revolution.
That's next.
You might need to join a union, yes.
I'm already onto it.
Well, so another question from me. You've had a good run of boomer jokes. Is this the end?
God, I can't do it. I can't let go of my boomer jokes. Look, in the book, I'm trying to have my cake and eat it too. There are lots of jokes at the expense of my beautiful parents and beautiful boomers. But by the end of the book, hopefully, spoiler alert, it is me calling something of a truce or saying this intergenerational warfare is nonsense. It doesn't tell the real story of what's going on here. Millennials didn't choose when we were born. Boomers didn't choose when you were born. Boomers happened to be born at a time in which capitalism was somewhat more tamed and in which there was extraordinary economic growth and living standards were increasing massively. There was greater public ownership, greater trade unions, as I said, and inequality was actually falling. The massive changes that were introduced in the 70s and 80s, particularly under the Hawke-Keating era, in the massive sort of economic rationalism period or neoliberalism period, really turned all that around and delivered the world in which we live, the world that millennials inherited, which is a fully neoliberalised Australia that we got into. So there are billionaire millennials, and the fastest growing demographic for homelessness in this country is women over 55. So obviously, boomers v millennials does not tell the whole story, and we should replace all that intergenerational warfare with class warfare. That's my general vibe. But I will still start making those jokes because they're very funny, and they make some boomers, particularly on Facebook, very angry, and that does continue to amuse me, yes.
What was the process like of writing the book? Did you write 3 books and then whittle it down to one?
It was terrible. It was very hard, and I never wanted
Poor
to...
Tom with working for 1 hour a day, writing this whittle book. It's really hard for you.
Yeah, it was. It felt like a proper book. No, I mean, writing a book is hard for anyone, I think. Writing your first book is very hard. Writing a book when you're a comedian and you have the sense of imposter syndrome was a big factor. I did do an extraordinary, like too much research and drown myself in research, then felt like I had to, replicate Wikipedia on the page, which is ridiculous. That's not what people wanted. And I started writing it in 2020, and then was supposed to come out at the end of 2021. But the second lockdown in Melbourne, really did push me in a not good place, in which, even though I had literally nothing else to do, the idea of getting up and working on the book was impossible. So the whole thing was pushed back to 2022. Yes, so that was very, very difficult. I had a very, very patient and delightful editor, Ben Ball, and a very helpful copy editor, Rosie. So I feel very lucky to have that team behind me, but never again, thanks. Not like that, anyway. Bob was telling me he wrote his whole book out longhand.
I wrote it by hand, yeah.
But who typed it up for you, Bob?
The boss.
Oh, look at that.
Good job, Judy.
Still working off her debt. Good to see.
Still
Bob
working off
showed
the
me.
debt. And
Bob showed me his callous little finger before we stepped up here.
thank goodness for COVID, because I had no excuse not to finish it once we got locked up in COVID.
Final question from me, Tom. You've got a podcast.
Yes.
Yes. Remind everyone what the name of that podcast is.
Podcast is called Like I'm a 6-Year-Old.
And you have lots of conversations with a diverse range of people. Were those conversations the start of this book? Did you find as though you had lots of conversations with lots of different people and think, right, I've got a big opinion about these 6 things now? Yeah,
it sort of informed the book. There's a number of points in the books where I'm quoting my interviews with Joe Hildebrand, with Doug Cameron, the former Labor Senator, with a bunch of other people. On that podcast, I've talked to Lyle Shelton from the Australian Christian Lobby, which was very interesting. And I've been running that since about 2015, and I've loved doing it. And it's since become very sporadic because I just run out of time to keep it up regularly. But certainly the whole journey I've been on politically to try and understand more about the world, which absolutely culminates in the book, was definitely progressed through the podcast. And if anyone happened to be listening from the start to where I am now, I think the book would not surprise you at all. Like all the stuff that I was learning and realising and questioning in the course on the road to the book certainly came through in the podcast too, yeah.
Well, I think that's a really nice way of finishing up.
Are there no other questions at all from the
I don't think so.
audience?
I haven't seen any hands.
Oh, bless.
No. Oh, here we go.
Oh,
very nice.
God.
Do you want a microphone or can you project?
Yes? Yep. When you retired, yes. Yeah, I mean, look, the term jobs for life, I looked into this a little bit, is a little bit exaggerated. I think the average tenure for a baby boomer worker was about 12 to 15 years. That's obviously the average across all workers. But certainly the experience of a lot of people is they worked at one company until the end. And that made a massive difference for the unions as well, right? Like if you're in a union and you're at the same place and you work your entire life, there are some people who had that experience and in their retirement they are still meeting up with their union comrades and their retirement is shaped by their own union activity too. So again, just a completely different world and relationship to work. Yeah, that's for sure.
I think, can I just add, I think the other concern that I have about these contracts is that, and I'm looking at local government, that shires like the Shire of Corangamite and some of these shires, about 30% of the people don't live in the Shire. They live in Melbourne or Geelong. They work during the week and then they go home for the weekend because they're on a 3-year contract or a 5-year contract. So they don't want to relocate the whole family. They don't want to sell the house. And the down point of all that is they're actually making no contribution to that community over the weekend. And when we had the amalgamation of municipalities around here, there was a saying which I think was a very good saying, was that everything was costed but nothing was valued. And when we saw the demise of some of the shires around here, the Mortlake's and that, the shire secretary and the engineer and the accountant, they were the secretary of the golf club, they were the president of the Lions club, but all these positions got lost through casual employment and contracts, I believe.
That's it. That's neoliberalism, right? That is the market society that we've created. Everything is handed over to the market. Everything has a dollar amount placed on it, and we are all reduced to just individuals operating in the market, as opposed to we live in a society, is a very cliched thing that's not blowing anybody's mind, but that really, in the reflection, that is what we've seriously lost: a reduction of our society and everything to the individual level. And a loss of sense of community, and a loss of sense of connection and collective responsibility for each other. No, everything has to be handed over to a profit-making exercise. Oh my gosh! Did I just blow your mind?
Mic drop.
My nose.
Blow your nose. Okay, that's different. Anyway, that's my rant.
I think that's a great rant to finish with,
Great
Tom.
rant.
That we all live in a society.
Wow.
They're powerful words to end on,
What a
Tom.
modern philosopher, yes.
No,
Yes.
the book is a really fantastic read. I encourage everyone to buy a book from the table over there.
Yeah, Jodie and Bob's books are there too.
Yes,
right?
they are. So tonight, though, I want to say tonight's been brought to everyone by the Warrnambool Library and Collins Booksellers, and they bring this event to you in partnership. Collins Booksellers Warrnambool is a small business and your local bookstore run by a dedicated team of book lovers. They actively support schools, programs and organisations within the community and are on hand 7 days a week to help with all of your bookish needs. And we love Collins Booksellers. Now you can buy Tom's book, I Millennial. That's the short version. But the long version is I Millennial, one snowflake screed against boomers, billionaires and everything else.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Tom. That's another tongue twister to end. Now, Michaeli over at the stand there also has Jodie's book, A Hole in My Jeans, and Bob's book, You Will Go, Won't You? I like both of those titles. Shana and my books are coming in a couple of years.
Any day.
Thank you so much, everyone. You've been a wonderful audience. Please put your hands together for Bob Hanby, Dr. Jodie Fleming, Shana Rogers, and the one and only Tom Ballard.
Thanks for coming, everyone. Thank you, Eilish. Have a great weekend. Thanks, team.